Quilters, there are so many different ways to make the half square triangle unit. Today I'd like to share with you how to use the Magic 8 method. Are you ready? Let's get stitching. Well, welcome back, folks. That's right, my name is Rob Appell from Stitchin Heaven. I'm a quilt maker and super blessed to see all of you out there. If it's your first time joining us, yes, we love to make quilts and share with you all kinds of different tips, techniques, and full-size projects. Quilt on the Wall here is from last year's New Year's Day Mystery Quilt Along, and often those folks who are sewing along with us all day long are concerned about how many half square triangles we need to make. So I thought this would be a really great time to do a refresher course on the Magic 8 method of making a half square triangle. Now, before we race ahead, yes, there are many different ways to make them. And some of us like them with a bias or a stretchy edge on the outside, and some of us like a bias or stretchy edge more in the middle. And a lot of that is based on the way we like to quilt. This unit right here is called the half square triangle, and they come in a whole variety of sizes, and regardless of what finished size, today we're really discussing how to make them. And this square and this square, right sides together, when handled correctly, can make 8 half square triangles all at one time. So right now I'm using roughly 5 1/4 inch squares. They were out of my scrap bin, but this will give us a really great idea, especially if you are getting ready to make a bunch of half square triangles yourself. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to draw a diagonal line on one of the two fabrics, but a diagonal line actually on both diagonals. And here's tip number 1, folks. As I get ready to draw out this diagonal, I use a chalk pencil, and over time this chalk pencil is going to get a little bit more dull and blunt. So I don't actually put my ruler right on the corner because we're going to be using this as a guideline for both sides of our sewing. So I really want it to be as accurate as possible. And because we're going to get 8 out of these 2 squares, we don't have a ton of excess trim to work with. Half square triangles are generally trimmed at the end, so this is all in the prep work for the building. And again, as I get ready to set up the second series of diagonals here, I'm just making sure I'm slightly in, or the pencil width inside. And you'll also notice I like to often draw from the center out on these bigger squares, using the pressure of my ruler to hold down, because I do want a nice, straight, crisp line as I'm getting ready to move over to the sewing machine. Now, as I get into the sewing machine, because these are sewing guidelines, I'm going to just use the foot as my edge work. And if I go a little bit narrow or a little closer to the chalk line, all the better. It will leave us excess for our half square triangles later. So right now, I'm just going to sew along with my edge of my foot along the outside edge there of that chalk line. Okay, and I'm going to cut my threads. And I'm just going to rotate. Now I go to the other side, same thing. I'm going to stitch down on that chalk line, crossing over the stitching that was already there before. And again, cutting my thread, and just on the bed of my machine, I'm just going to rotate it, bring it back around, and stitch down the other side here. Cut that again free of your machine, and now we're going to make a series of cuts, folks. And I actually like to cut from the outside edges first, because these chalk lines will also become cut lines, but we're going to also need to cut some straight lines. So I've got it on a wonderful rotating mat, and first thing I'm going to do now is I am going to split through all of these thread crosshairs, making sure I hit that diagonal line where they split. But I'm also, folks, really double checking first to make sure that my ruler is really nice and square along the fabric itself, because I want to make sure that all of these are as true and square cut as possible. So I'm going to cut real quick through here. And if possible, I'm not going to move the fabric. I'm just going to kind of peel up the ruler for myself, rotate around my rotating cutting mat, and again, finding a real nice square line across the top, finding my crosshairs there, and then slicing again. Now at this point, we technically have 4 squares, right? But we also still are going to cut through these little chalk lines. Okay, you can use your ruler as you should, because this will help keep your hand safe, and then begin setting them aside as they become into our units. And I will start to share with you here how to use a couple of different trimming methods, both the block lock tools and the slotted trimmers, now that I have all of these set together. But both of those tools are for trimming of half square triangles, and they don't work exactly the same, but they both work very nicely. Okay, so let's start with the slotted trimmer, folks. So I'm going to set a few of these aside, and on a slotted trimmer, this tool here is going to come in, and you're going to set this tool on the dotted line and on the thread. Now technically I like to lay the dotted line just below the thread so I can still see the thread, because that's going to make a slightly larger half square triangle. And then I'm going to use this, and they come in half size increments. So I can do a 2-inch, a 3-inch, a 4-inch with this size tool. I can do a 2.5, a 3.5, a 4.5 with the other size tool that comes as the companion set. It doesn't allow for 1/4-inch cuts. So I'm going to slice here, I'm going to rotate my mat, and I have now trimmed effectively. And there are little grooves in the tool, but I find it's almost easier, especially if you're going fast, to just go ahead and dog-ear your corners now. So let me show you that again. We're going to line up with the thread just north of our dotted line, or above the dotted line. And it's nice because you can kind of float, because it now trims into a very accurate half square triangle. If you want to use the slots, rotate it so you're going from the inside out with those grooves, like that, and that'll also cut off and prepare to go over to the iron. As we love to do, iron from the light to the dark, or iron to the dark side, as we often say. And that there will make a wonderful little 2-inch half square triangle, because of the way we used the slotted trimmer tool. Okay. Now, the block lock tools you iron first. And I was having this discussion with a good friend recently. She is a little bit less carefree about her quilting, a bit more passion for her precision. And what she was reminding me is the accuracy she felt like the block lock brought along. So the nice thing about the block lock is, yes, there is a groove cut on the bottom side of the ruler that will then lock in, but you have to make sure you use it correctly. So right now I've locked it in so that my seam allowance bulk is in that groove, but I also still have my diagonal running right down that diagonal line. Now let's say we wanted to trim this one also to 2 inches. So you can see I'm plenty past the 2-inch mark. So again, I will just trim and trim. And then what I'll do is, normally I would have slid this down, but I got a little sloppy with my hands. We're just going to slide down now. We're still locked in with that seam allowance into the tool. And you can see now I found my 2 and my 2. And I'm going to go ahead and trim that. And I'm going to trim that. The other reason this person was telling me she felt like this was a more precise way to do it with the block lock is we've pre-pressed. And I think I do agree, maybe more precise with a block lock, maybe more efficient or faster with the slotted trimmer, because we could still get a wonky seam allowance as we press after, or a wonky square as we do press after. But those both are some pretty nice looking half square triangles. So again, we're going to stack these up. Let me go through that block lock method again with you to show you one more time. I'm going to come over by starting by pressing to the dark side. I'm going to set my block lock tool in so that my diagonal is set. I'm double checking to make sure I'm past the lines I will need as I begin to trim. This time as I trim, I'm going to rotate. I'm going to really use this mat to my advantage, right? So I can slide it down, slide it through, anything I need so I can really see what's going on. And now I'm going to go ahead and lock in that 2x2 down here at the bottom again. Put some pressure on the tool. And sometimes I like to also cut off from the wide side to the narrow side there because it just gives me more accuracy. But there again is another really beautiful and accurate half square triangle, and those will go on to fill in so many of the units and parts and pieces of the blocks for your quilt in the future to come. Maybe you'll be joining us for one of our virtual quilt alongs very soon. I certainly hope you do. So let's review real quick that Magic 8 method. All you really need to do is have your 2 equally sized cut squares, double draw your diagonals. So on both sides of those drawn diagonal lines, and then when you go to cut, remember, cut from the outside edge first through the diagonals. Don't cut first on the drawn lines. It's so much easier later to cut those drawn lines that way when they're all set up that way for you. So I certainly hope this helped. I hope you enjoyed this little bit quicker, faster paced tutorial just on one specific method of quilt making. If you would like to learn more from me and some more methods, please let me know in the comments below what you would like to learn right here at Stitchin Heaven, and we'll do our best to produce those videos for you. Thanks again for being here today, folks. Until I see you next time, please stay well. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It really helps support our channel. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Hit the little button to be notified every time we go live or do a new video for all of you. And here's one from the past I think you'll really enjoy.